What's up, people? It's DevSage here, and this video is going to be more of a project-based tutorial as opposed to the standard topic-based. The general topic about the project, though, is centered around web scraping. So say I wanted to do some research and analysis on job posting data from Indeed, for example. How might I do this? Well, first things first, I would need some data. I would need to fetch or scrape the job posting data from Indeed. Then I'd probably want to save that data somewhere, like in a database or a spreadsheet or maybe some kind of cloud storage. And once that's done, I would have the data that I need and I can perform whatever analysis I want, like seeing which jobs are in the highest demand or which jobs have the highest pay or which companies do candidates prefer more than others, etc. So how can we fetch the job listing data in the first place? We can build a web scraper. I could potentially just build out my own scraper from scratch with Puppeteer or Nightmare or something like that, but that would take some time to do. Instead, we can use a pre-built scraping solution to get up and running fairly quickly. A solution that's built to scale and handle potentially large amounts of data. We can use a service called BrightData for this. BrightData is a data collection or aggregation service that makes it incredibly easy to scrape and aggregate public information. If you click the link in the description or in the pinned comment, you can sign up for a free trial for BrightData. All right, so this project has a few prerequisites. Like I said, we're going to be using MongoDB as the database. So if you don't have MongoDB installed already, you're going to want to do that. I would recommend that you go ahead and install MongoDB Compass, which is essentially just a graphical user interface that allows you to visualize the data that's inside of your MongoDB collection. It's so we don't have to go through using the command line and doing all these different commands. Just go ahead and download Compass, and that should come with MongoDB, so you don't have to worry about installing it separately. You'll also want to install ngrok, which is essentially just a way to expose our local host server to the public internet. You can basically run ngrok HTTP and then the port of your locally running application, and ngrok will give you back a public link that can be shared and accessed publicly. And like I said before, if you don't already have a BrightData account, you can click the link in the description and start a free trial. And then once you do that, you should be logged in and you'll be brought to your user dashboard. But first, let's see what we're actually building. Like, what is the project in the first place? The idea is that we're going to have an application with two endpoints. One endpoint is going to be responsible for calling out to BrightData and saying, hey, I want you to give me job listing data from Indeed that match these criteria. For example, software engineers in South Carolina. BrightData is going to say, okay, cool. Give me a few minutes. And when I'm done, I'm going to send that data to the other endpoint so that you can do whatever you want with it. In this case, that endpoint is going to save the data into the database. And that's pretty much it. BrightData already knows how to scrape Indeed. And so now we don't have to try to write our own scraper. What are the different selectors, or how do we avoid being throttled or IP banned? We don't have to worry about any of that because BrightData takes care of it and just calls us back whenever they have the right data. By the way, the full code for this project is going to be on my GitHub. So just go to my GitHub account and fork the repo and you'll have the full project right there. And also follow me on GitHub if you're not already. So going back to BrightData, once you've signed up for your free trial, you should be brought to the dashboard. In this case, we're going to be looking for the web scraper API. And so if you click that, you're going to see a bunch of different pre-built scrapers that BrightData has. In this case, these are Facebook scrapers where you can scrape Facebook comments by URL. Also, we have, let's see what we have, Facebook company reviews. So you can get all the company reviews by URL. There's Instagram comments that you can retrieve, or Reels. And there are a bunch of other cool pre-built scrapers here too. For example, if we go into real estate data, if you wanted to scrape some Zillow housing data, for example, the price history for a particular house, you could do that here. BrightData has a pre-built scraper for that. Or if we wanted to, let's see, financial data, if you wanted to scrape Yahoo Business finance information, we have a scraper for that as well. Let's see, there's social media scrapers like Twitter and TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn. So the one scraper that we're interested in is the Indeed web scraper. So let's go under B2B data and click Indeed. Oops, let's go back, Indeed. So Indeed has 7 scrapers. You can scrape company information by URL, or you can scrape job listing information by URL as well. But we want to search job listing information by keyword. That'll let us pass in things like full stack engineer or janitor or something like that. So let's click into this. The first tab you should be on is the overview tab, which has information about the inputs that the scraper needs in order to function. For example, country, domain, keyword search, and the location. And it also gives you a preview of how the output results will look. In this case, this could be a CSV output, or you can have a JSON output. So some of the fields that the data would have is job ID, company name, job title, I believe salary is here somewhere, salary formatted, company rating, company reviews. So that's a preview of what the data would look like if you used this scraper. If we go over to data collection APIs here, we can basically kind of tweak and modify and test out how the scraper would work. Essentially, you make a curl request to BrightData's API and you tell it which pre-built scraper you want to hit. You have the option to deliver the results to external storage like an S3 bucket, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or Snowflake. Or if you didn't want to do that, you could send to webhook. And this is the approach we're going to be taking. So we're going to take a URL from ngrok that's pointing to our local host server, and we're going to use that as the webhook URL. All right, so let's go over here to the dictionary tab, and here we'll see a list of field names that BrightData will give back to us as a result of the web scrape. So the results will have a job ID, and this fill rate shows the likelihood that this field will contain valid data. So 100% of results will have a job ID, but only 80% of results will have a company name. So that's something that should be kept in mind. Okay, so let's go back up and let's get our API key. So let's go back to data collection APIs and go to get API token, and you'll see a list of your users and your API tokens for that user. You should see a button that says add API key or something to that effect. You'd want to click that button and it'll give you an API key. You'll never be able to see that key again once you close that modal, so make sure you copy it. But once you do that, you can go back to Web Scraper API. For example, let's go to B2B data, Indeed, job listing by keyword, data collection API. You can paste your API token in here, and that will change the curl request here. And you can actually take this request and run it directly in your terminal if you want it to, and you should be able to see the data that it gives you back. But the way our application is going to work, we're not going to run this command in curl. We're just going to send a fetch request. So let's go and take a look at the code. All right, so this is the code. The application is already built. We'll just be walking through the main pieces of it. Let's go over to the app.ts file. And this is just an Express server, right? Nothing fancy going on here. So we have an Express server that we're going to be running on port 3002. We're using the Express JSON middleware so that our application can accept JSON in the request. And we have this router middleware that contains our 2 endpoints. So we'll be taking a look at the router a little bit later. Outside of that, we have the app.listen. So this is what's starting our Express application. And you can see I've wrapped this in a database server.connect, or database service.connect, sorry. And this is just a pattern I like doing. If we go into the database server file, we have information about our Mongo server. So the database name is Indeed listings. And you'll see that if you open up Compass. You won't see this until you actually run the application, but I guess let me show you actually how to get into this. So if you're just coming to Compass for the first time, MongoDB Compass, what you'll probably see, you're not going to be connected to any database, but I think they'll give you your localhost database here for free. So if you just click connect, that should just connect you directly to your localhost instance. MongoDB should be running in the background already if you started this application. In this case, I already have my Indeed listings database and my job listings container. There's no data in it right now, but that's just how you kind of navigate that. Ask me later. But in any event, after Mongoose connects, this then will run, and then we'll call the callback. Whatever callback we passed in to connect, that will run if Mongoose successfully connects. Oops. So where does this callback come from? Well, if we look back in app.ts, the callback that we passed to connect is here. So that's just a little bit how that works. Like I said, the actual routes are in a different file. So if we F12 into this, we can see that we have a file here with two post routes. One is find jobs, and this is the route that we're going to be hitting ourselves to essentially initiate the call to BrightData. So a little sneak peek, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. So we have a request body, and in the request body, we're going to be passing in a keyword search and a location. If either of those is not present, we'll return an error. Otherwise, we'll initiate a call to BrightData. And so this api.brightdata.com, this is that link that we saw over here. We just took it and copied it into our application. And we have the dataset ID, which is pointing to the Indeed scraper. And the endpoint that we have, I have stored in an environment variable, BrightData webhook endpoint. This is going to be in the env. In my case, this is what mine looks like. This is the ngrok URL, which I'll show you how to set up in a second, /Indeed listings. So that's actually pointing to the other endpoint that we have. So if we close this one, this is find jobs. The Indeed listings endpoint is what BrightData is going to hit in order to give us the data that we asked for. We take the request body, we validate it. It should be an array of objects. So if it's not an array, we'll return an error. Otherwise, we'll take that array of objects and we'll massage the data a little bit, just so it follows a certain format that we expect. So we'll camel case all of the different fields. And then once we do that, we take the job listing model. In this case, this is a Mongoose model that I created that has all of these different fields, and call insert many. And if that fails, well, we'll throw an error, but otherwise that should insert the data into our MongoDB database. So how does this actually work in practice? So if I open up Postman, for example, or I guess let me go over here and let's run the application. So if I clear this and I said, well, first of all, the first thing you're going to want to do is run npm install if you haven't already. But from there, you should just be able to run npm run dev. That should start the development server. And it'll be in watch mode. So you can make a change to the application if you want, and it'll live reload for you. But we've started our localhost server on port 3002. Now we do want to expose our localhost server to the public so that BrightData can actually call into it. So you can kind of see in this other tab, I already have ngrok running. But once you download ngrok, I think you'll also have to create an account as well. But once you do that, you should be able to run ngrok http and pass in whatever port you want to expose. So in this case, our application is running on 3002. So I would click ngrok http 3002, and ngrok is kind of formatted weird here, but ngrok will give you a URL that's public, that's pointing to your localhost server. So you could take this URL and give it to a friend, and they would be able to access your application running on your machine. You could take this and you could give it to BrightData, for example, in the call to BrightData, find jobs. You would say, okay, BrightData, this is the endpoint that I want you to hit. So we're going to look in .env and we're going to replace this. So BrightData webhook endpoint, this is going to be this / Indeed listings. And also you'll want to replace your API key. Make sure your API key is set, and also the webhook endpoint. And make sure it's pointing to the Indeed listings endpoint, because that's what BrightData is going to call. So if you save this, and whenever you make a .env change, I think you need to restart the server so it actually picks up. But if we go back here, if we go to Postman, for example, and we call into find jobs, localhost 3002 find jobs, and we pass in a location and a keyword search. So I want software engineer jobs in Columbia, South Carolina. I could hit send, success true, job search initiated, and you can see that our localhost server logged that. Now what's happening now is BrightData is processing this request. BrightData is currently scraping Indeed, and when they're done, they're going to call into that Indeed listings endpoint here, and we'll save that data in our database. I'll pause it right here and come back in a few minutes whenever BrightData sends the data. All right, we are back, and BrightData has just given us the data. So I have a console log, listings inserted successfully, whenever the data is inserted into the database. So if we go into Compass, we should be able to refresh here. You should have it. If you didn't have it already, it should be auto-created, this job listings container. But if you refresh, you'll see that you have 10 objects here, or 10 records. So we have a job ID, URL, it's a writer developer, whatever that is. Let's see, no salary, that's unfortunate. .NET developer, 55 an hour, description. But yeah, you have all this data directly from Indeed. And so this is pretty cool. And this is just one of the things BrightData can do. Like I said, there are all kinds of other scrapers that you can mess around with. Like I said, the code for this is going to be on my GitHub. So if you want to kind of dig around and play with this more, feel free to go steal this code and do whatever you want with it. Be sure to sign up for a free trial to BrightData using the link in the description. I hope you learned something in this video. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more content and more web dev tutorials. But other than that, peace.